Hey guys, it's the 2 Plus podcast again, and we're pivoting slightly to look at tactics through a new light of explaining the game a bit better. Feedback from the channel and the old world at large is evolving, and I guess a lot of people come to us and sort of thank us for trying to demystify what can be a very complex game. For us, old world, the complexity is a feature, not a bug. We'd like it to be more elegant. We'd like it to be more immersive. We'd like the representation of a fantasy battle to be more congruent. But at the same time, when you play simpler war games, they just don't tend to have the bite that Warhammer Fantasy Battles has. Something I've wanted to speak on for a while are musicians. They're one of the little subtleties that I think matches this approach really well. So, on one hand, in a battle, the idea of even having a musician is faintly ridiculous, but you can see that throughout time and in this sort of I guess, aesthetic musicians, where they're horn blowers, drum beaters, or bellowers, as the rules writers like to call them, have a they fit in this world. On top of that, in the game, there are a lot of little rules that sort of can add up to a lot if you're consciously aware of them. So if you're thinking like you've got 5 points to spend or 7 points or whatever a musician costs in your unit, typically I tend to take them. And in some units, I like to take them over a standard bearer or a champion. But today I'm just going to talk about how musicians work because a game that I played recently had all three of the rules come up in almost synchronicity. So this was a game where I was playing Grand Cafe. I'm playing Bretonia. I painted up this Bretonian army 6 months or a year too late, and it's very fluffy. A lot of knights, a lot of peasants, not many pegs, not many characters at this stage. We'll see how I go if I continue to feel the burn. But what I would point to is this is an army that has a lot of variance in leadership, a lot of low leadership. And morale is meant to be a huge part of rank and flank games. So in this case, I've got a musician every unit that I can, and they play out in different roles. So, just to begin with, I think you want to know that the musician is the last model to die in as long as there are other rank and file models, they will pick up the instrument and keep playing. The music has to go on. So, unless there's a standard bearer and a champion, the musician will be the last model to go. And in that case, it's not necessarily the musician where it's standing. It is that musician will have to replace one of those other models and be there. So that can create some funky sort of situations. And Warhammer, for this, in this sense, is not a precise game that people might want it to be when they play tournaments. The second side of it is it's not a lookout sir capable model. So you are still just rolling to take the hit on the unit, and the musician, then another rank and file model has to be replaced by the musician if it goes away. So there's a more I want to say about Lookout Sir soon. I think it's one of the more undervalued rules in the game. But for now, musicians are going to be there mostly until the end of a unit. And one of the examples that's very important in when it comes up. So the first rule you've got with musicians is steadying rhythm. So that's with +1 to leadership for a rally test. So in this case, I had my lovely little unit of men-at-arms here with two champions running away from a, Cathay and Sentinel. So I had been sitting on that objective with 30 men-at-arms, 20 men-at-arms once upon a time. The Sky Lantern had took down 13 of them in one hit, which I think is pretty typical from most people's experiences, and kept going. I interestingly passed that first panic check with the low leadership, but then when the Terracors and Cathayan Sentinel decided to make a long charge onto the men at arms, they failed their terror check and ran. So the turn after my turn, I had to take a rally test. Now, if you know men at arms, they are leadership 5. If you have either of the champion style models, it can be leadership 6. So that meant that when I rolled for the musician, I could roll +1 to leadership and roll 7. My general was off doing general things elsewhere. I don't think I had a knight's unit near enough by to use the leadership bonus, which is something Britannians can do. So I needed to roll on a 7 or under, which I was able to do and rally these guys. So that was interesting. That the steadying rhythm, if there's a musician in the unit, as you can see on the right hand side, a guy with his big drum beating it, that was enough to bring the unit to heal and get them to rally. Obviously, to get smashed again in this case, but it was great Warhammer. Look at the photo. Beautiful. And that's part of it. The second thing, which is a little bit more complicated that came up, is the onwards to victory bonus. So that's +1 in case of a tied combat result. You know, you can imagine that the high drama of breaking a combat tie with a musician is worth it almost every time. Sadly, for me, if I'd been a little bit more cognizant in this situation, I would have been able to get this result. So I'll explain the situation. I had taken a few early hits to these Grail Knights and had decided just to charge into Mao Ying because I had nothing better to do. I'd sort of got stuck. They were going to die anyway. They were going to get shot to pieces by magic missiles or other missile attacks. So I charged in, not expecting to do much. I got challenged and I accepted. Now, there's 3 models left at this stage. I accepted with the musician just by default, thinking in my head, oh, you keep the champion alive, it's got more attacks. If I'd accepted with the champion, what happened was Mao Ying rolled poorly, only was able to do 1 wound on the Grail Knight on the Grail Knight who took the challenge. So if the champion had died with my standard bearer, I would have then had +1, and I would have been able to break the tie with the musician and win combat by 1, and at the very minimum get Mao Ying to give ground at this stage. So even maybe have a chance of failing a test on 11 or 12 running away, which would have been incredible. Unfortunately, I chose the musician, the silly guitarist here on the right, and the musician died. So when Mao Ying then won combat, I only had unit strength 4 left. I also, well, it doesn't really matter too much anymore because unit strength 10 to get that +1 bonus, but I only tied the combat, which kept them stuck in the same place. So interestingly, then the Grail Knights was able to challenge again next turn, but that time overkill meant that I lost the combat. So one of the little quirks here that I wanted to talk about was that the musician has to be in the front rank. So that's becoming a little bit more of a thing. So sometimes you play maybe an Ogre Death Star, or you're playing a unit like this. It might be in Lance formation. I'm not sure if they count as being in the front rank. The rules explicitly say it's got to be in the front rank to get this onwards to victory bonus, which is a little bit of a quirk that might come up for some people. And one of those classic GWisms, it's like, why does this rule exist? Doesn't the musician get to continue to play its guitar from safety? But, complexity, feature, not a bug. The last rule attached to musicians is quick time. So if you have a musician in your unit, you get +1 leadership to march tests when you're within 8 inches of an enemy unit, which is called enemy sighted. That I have been playing a lot of immune to psych type armies for a while now, and I think that it's been funny that when you play an army with morale, you see the big gap, and it's really great Warhammer leadership test, especially with what you saw in our last video. One of the better rules, I think, that now failing a panic test with a large unit doesn't mean they automatically flee anymore. They'll Fabigo instead, and falling back in good order is nowhere near like fleeing in the rules. So +1 leadership to march test here. The lantern has closed in on my knights errant, and I had tried to march so I would be able to get away. March 16 should get me a fair distance, hopefully, out of the way. And these knights errant, like humans, they're just leadership 7. So I would be able to roll on an 8 to pass this test. So you can imagine on a 7, you're looking at 58%, and on an 8, that's going way up, I think, to 72%. So if you can get that +1, that's a significant difference in this instance. Here, I rolled a double 6. They didn't get to march. They got obliterated, as you can see, and I've made 2 references to the Sky Lantern in this video already. it wasn't a great day for the humans and their toughness 3, despite their armor. So quick time can be useful to you as well. It can be useful on things like fast cavalry, because that's when, even though some of them have reserve move, you won't be able to skip away with their high movement value. And in this case, or even like march, you could be in marching column. Those restrictions on having to stop when you come into 8 inches of another unit no longer exist in the game, and you need to get out of there quickly. That +1 can be the difference between making it or not, if you're luckier than I have been. So that's the end of the musicians. I want to thank Jeff at Pandemwargaming. Please follow the link for his high quality terrain and movement trays. We use them in the show. You can see all the time. And also to our financial supporters, thank you again, guys. We'll have more of these videos. Don't sleep on musicians. They're a huge part of the game. Remember to include them in your especially low leadership armies. I think you'll be happy to have them over time. Thanks again, guys. See you later.